I think we'll move on now to budget day itself proper, which was a strange one this year. It was preceded by all the usual leaks. And then on the day, we had billions and billions and billions to spend. Billions and billions, as Michael Noonan used to say famously. And we're still trying to figure out up here, Louise, I think you have the same feeling that how's the dust settled? Have they done a good budget? Have they done a bad budget? Why aren't they superheroes? I'll just give you one example of how I think the mood was up here yesterday. The day after the budget, normally it's fisticuffs with the opposition come in and they try and tear down the ministers, the Taoiseach, whoever. So during leaders' questions, that's their prime spot in the day when they have the Taoiseach in their sights and they're supposed to pick their best battle lines for the budget. Yesterday, it was 4 leaders' questions and 0 questions about the budget from just the day before. I found that very interesting. Budget day itself and the budget, how do you think they got on, Louise? Was it a good budget or a bad budget for the government and for the people?
I think it was a better budget than a lot of people were expecting, because I think there had been a lot of tempering of expectations in the run up to the budget. And, Michael McGrath himself said it a couple of weeks ago, the finance minister, that he'd rather temper expectations and over deliver than kind of raise expectations and then under deliver. So I think it wasn't a bad budget. I don't think everyone agrees with that, but I think we were kind of saying for earlier joke during the week, there's kind of one for everyone in the audience. And there's a €12 social welfare increases, which I know people will always say that they should be more, but €12 last year and the year before, that's the highest those social welfare increases has ever been. Now, it is coming against a backdrop, I suppose, of really high inflation, and people are struggling to make ends meet. But €12 by any other stretch of the imagination is a decent increase in them. I think there was some criticism of the fact the living alone allowance wasn't extended. And what the Social Protection Minister, Heather Humphreys, is saying to that was, well, you have all the lump sum payments, and if you kind of average them all out, you're €33 and upwards better off. Now, I don't think people are getting those lump sum payments in December and January and going, oh, well, Jesus, I better divide this by 52 now to make it last for every week of the year. So I don't necessarily think that argument is fair. But I think in general, the social welfare was a significant bump, but I think you'd always say that you could go that little bit further. The tax package was kind of as expected. It was largely similar to last year, where people will have about €800 better in their be €800 better off and have €100 more in their pockets come the end of the year. You had the changes to the USC, which hasn't been done in years. You had the changes to the tax bands, which is kind of Fine Gael's raison d'etre really for being in government. I think on top of that, you had the energy credits, 3 of them, €150, which people really rely on. The renters tax credit's gone up. That's gone up to €750 from €500, as we kind of predicted last week, Fergal. We didn't think it would go up to the thousands, but they managed to get it to €750, so they managed to get it in between. And I think the big one, which people are welcoming yet also quite angry about at the same time, is the 25% cut to childcare fees. Because, I said it myself, I put my hands up. I said last week I didn't actually think Roger O'Gorman would do it. He did do it. He got it. But the big kind of bone of contention is it's not going to be done till September. And I think that's really annoyed a lot of people.
Yeah, it's I laughed when I heard it because I said September 2024. The budget is in October 2024. So is this year or next year? So it's a very Jesuitical answer. It's I think they're pushing it to say that it's a measure for this year, when it's going to come in weeks before next year's budget, 3/4 of the way through next year. But I do think that it was a good win at the same time, definitely politically, because he'd made this promise. It was a rock he could have perished on. He's a very busy man in that department, as we all know. It's not just the Department of Children, it's part of integration, equality, you name it. It's got all sorts of strands to it. But I think there were losers from him getting the childcare package. And I think it's not a stretch to say that when the negotiations were still going on Monday, there were 2 departments that were in there head to head. It was the Department of Children and it was the Department of Social Welfare. And we were both hearing at the same time, I think the social welfare was pushing for past €12. We'll say bulletins at lunchtime are all saying, oh yeah, it's going to be in excess of €12. Behind the scenes, we're hearing 15, which would have been a great win. And then I think when we heard 12, I was thinking, sounds like a bit of a loss, strangely, for the Department of Social Protection. And I think the gain, because they were in government bills at the same time, were probably the Department of Children, who got this mega commitment, even though it's on a very long finger, to have basically 50% childcare fees from 12, 13 months ago. That's when he started this program. So that's a big win for them. Other areas of the budgets that got my attention: health. So we'll say that the budget books, anyone who's not familiar with the speeches themselves, I think they were 26 pages and 35 pages around. I have them here on this desk here somewhere. I don't use props much, but that's the big budget book that we got. It's horrible. And the actual speeches in there are about 25 to 35 pages long each. And they go to every department where they've, the money ministers, Pascal and Michael, where they've tinkered here and there. Health was very small. I'm talking paragraphs. And this is a massive budget that was 17 billion, huge, around 5 or 6 years ago, out of 80 odd billion is what we spent a year. Now it's in the early 20s, 22, 23, probably 24 billion next year when supplements are included. And there was nothing about it. There was nothing in any extra spending. I know they will say that there are reduced prescription charges and that they're bringing in medical cards for more children, but that's all been announced in the past. It's coming in this budget. They were promising things like 1,500 beds. They got hammered. Government got hammered by that today by Pierce Doherty at the Dáil. That was his main budget criticism, was the Department of Health. On the budget day proper, he did housing, which today he returned after the dust had settled that he'd help. So I think the fact that they've no highlights to point to, no 1,500 beds, no further reduction in prescription charges, etc., I think health stands out as a big loser, where they've so much money there that they could have announced some extra sort of spending. Vaping, for instance, we'll talk about that later in this show. We were hoping that we might see a vape tax introduced to, dissuade kids, to be honest, sometimes buying these things ahead of actual legislation next year, banning them for under 18s. There was a mention, there was a paragraph, but there was no commitment to this year, and he said it would be addressed next year, but there was no detail applied on that. So those are some of the interesting takes on the budget. And one final one, I suppose, we could talk about this all day, but I noticed that there was a phrase that came up from Ged Nash on Tuesday, and it came up again with Pierce Doherty today, actually, and maybe it's an old Irish one I haven't heard. They were talking about one-off payments, and they said it would be like snow in a ditch. It would soon melt away and nobody would see it. So I think that's interesting. They're both making the same point, that when you get your €400 bonus payment, or you get your double children's allowance at Christmas, once that's gone, it's gone. Where if you had upped the pension to €15 a week, you would have that. And politically, you would be able to go back to them voters and remind them next year, and at the end of next year, here, look, you're still getting 15 and 14 and €12 extra a week, thanks to us, where, eating bread is long forgotten when it comes to the one-off payments.
But it is worth noting, though, that with the pension and with the social welfare, Sinn Féin said that they put some up by 10, and that included the core social welfare payments and the pension for those living alone. But the pension for those not living alone, they'd only put up by €10. So the government kind of hit in between. I do think, and I said this to Heather Humphreys the other day, that those one-off payments are a flash in the pan, and €200 doesn't go that far, €400 doesn't go that far, and it's kind of gone before you realize it. And she was trying to make the argument, well, it's money in people's pocket, and I said, well, yeah, it is money in people's pocket, but it's not money, it's money they're getting once off, and it's not necessarily going to stretch. And it was like when she was trying to make the argument, well, if you include those lump sum payments, people are €33 to, I think the upper figure was 47 euro a week better off. But no one is going to keep those one-off payments. Like if you're like me and money burns a hole in your pocket, you're not going to keep that for the year. You're not going to divvy that out to yourself every week. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. I think just coming back to health, I think the health budget was rather interesting, because that was really the fraught topic of discussion amongst a lot of ministers. We know that there's been massive budget overruns in the Department of Health and HSE. It's 1.1 billion at the moment. It could even go up from that by the end of the year. I think Bernard Gloucester said it could hit 1.4. So I suppose the issue there was, do you build that into the Department of Health's budget as part of its core expenditure? And I think that was what ultimately had to be done. And there was, I think, some money put aside for new measures. But I think if you look at the health budgets in years gone past, they've been quite big, they've been quite flashy. You've had stuff like free contraception, that only increased last month for people up to age 30. That's expensive. You've had the IVF stuff, that's expensive. You've had the GP cards to huge parts of the population, that is expensive as well. So they've introduced all these big measures, they've come at great expense, they've completely overshot their budget. And I suppose in situations like that, I mean, what can you really do except try to rein things in a bit? And I think, what they've done have has been important and it has been worthwhile. And I think a lot of people are appreciative of the measures that they've done in health, but I don't think the overspending, and someone said this to me recently, if you walked into a hospital and you were getting a brilliant service and you were getting a bed straight away, and you know, you didn't have doctors who were at the end of their tether and nurses and moving to Australia, and could really impact health service, maybe you wouldn't mind the Department of Health overshooting its budget so much. But sometimes when you go into a hospital and you can't see what that money is being spent on and you can't see where that value is coming from, I think that's when people start getting annoyed. So I think the Department of Health's budget was always going to have to be the way the Department of Health's budget ended up in budget 2024.
Yeah, it's a budget within a budget, really, isn't it? It's amazing. It's huge. It's huge. It's basically a quarter of our total state spending. That's mad.